Hello there and welcome to this vlog of February 2024, and in today's video we are going to talk about scale or scaling, or more specifically the scaling of BattleTech miniatures over the last couple of decades and how improved it has become, and how that improvement is really, I think, going to factor into the success of BattleTech over the next several years. The reason why this has come up as a topic is because somebody across the community had painted some miniatures of some of the mid 2000s plastic box set miniatures that were available for BattleTech. I believe that they were all like replicas of the old 80s metal miniatures, but they'd just done them in plastic. And the scaling was just incredible, really. What I've done is when I move on from this very generic picture of a set of scales, what I've done is I've got a picture of those miniatures that I found painted online against two of the modern Catalyst Game Labs miniatures, set against ones from my own collection, kind of in a similar pose. Two of the mechs, though, are not actually available in the new plastic, so I've kind of used proxies for those, but the same tonnage. So you'll be able to kind of just see directly how the scales kind of are just monumentally different. And it's only from like 15 years. Obviously, technology's come a long way in that time. But most importantly, Catalyst are a serious firm who are really kind of putting money and investment, and they've got all the Kickstarter money obviously behind making these great new miniatures. Back in the day with BattleTech, BattleTech was never traditionally a miniatures based IP, so I think they were just trying to do the best that they could. So I'm not saying this to give any negativity towards the previous custodians or anything like that. It's just a really interesting how that scale has changed. Another important thing to note before we get into the photo is that the top photo that you'll see here is not my work. It's just something that somebody posted online. I don't know this person. I don't even know if I can contact them because the DMs on Twitter are weird, and I think you've got to know each other or follow each other to DM each other. So what I've done is I've just used the photo. I've not used that person's name or anything like that. So I would usually reach out if I knew somebody, but there's no kind of affiliation to them directly anyway, and they've posted it on social media. Another really important point, because I know people, this has been a bit of a controversy over the last several weeks. I am not talking here about people's quality of paint jobs or the quality of the plastic models that they're using. You do you in terms of that. What I'm focusing on here is scale. So I'm not going to kind of veer into any discussion on, especially the paint job in of itself. That's completely separate issue. But even the quality of the miniatures, just keep in mind that this run was from I think it is 2007. I think that's when they came out, and again, it's just think about how plastics technology has come over the last 15 years. Just look at the difference now. If you collect anything from Games Workshop, or even if you just get regular board games, the quality of what they can do now is just so much better than it was even a decade ago. So again, I just want to be very clear about that. We are only going to be talking about scale. Anyway, let's have a look. I've only got one photo to show, so here it is. Now, what I've done is just in terms of the mechs on show here, you can see on the top picture, the top picture is the guest photo. The bottom picture is mechs from my Dust Counters regiment. So on the top photo, we've got this is from left to right as well. We've got a Whitworth, a Cyclops, a Catapult, and a Cicada. I always say Cicada in a funny way, apparently. Keep in mind that Cicadas are not something that we have to deal with in Britain, so I don't say that word very often, so I really don't know how you say it. I say Cicada. You may say Cicada. I have no idea. Anyway, because though the Whitworth and the Cicada, we don't have the modern plastics for those yet. We'll get in them soon. They will be available in the next Kickstarter. I've actually used a couple of 40-ton proxy mechs here You can see like the Sentinel here. They're kind of, they're obviously different mechs, but they are both 40 tonners. So that's good. At least it kind of shows, how our 40 ton mech should like look and feel. Obviously, though, we do have access to the Cyclops and the Catapult, so I've used those two specifically here. And I think much more than the two mediums here. Remember, they are 40 tonners, so they're just like one step above a light mech, so they're the smaller end of medium mechs. And we'll talk about that in terms of how the scaling works. And then really what I want to talk about is why scaling matters. And also on some other things as well. I'll try to do a balanced video here, so I'll talk about like the differences between like, say, like mass and weight. Should that be a factor? Does it matter in terms of the law? Things like that. So let's start anyway just by talking about like the cross comparison here of the mechs. And it's very noticeable, right? Like, and remember, this is not a perfect picture to do this with. Ideally, you'd want them all kind of stood side by side. Obviously, the person that posted their picture is just kind of showing the paint job. They're not showing this for scale like I am. So, if I had, if I was going to do this myself, I would just line them all up together and take photos so you can see it directly. But just to kind of keep it fair, I've kind of backdropped the Catapult and the Cyclops slightly behind the 240 tonners. And that obviously, in terms of like optics, will make the two mechs at the front there seem just slightly bigger anyway. I think you can certainly see that with the Cicada in the top photo. Like it, yes, the scaling against the Catapult is quite frankly ridiculous because the Cicada is a 40-ton mech, the Catapult is a 65-ton mech, and the Cicada looks bigger. It might not be. They might be like the same height. It's just that the way that the Catapult is positioned there in the background a little bit. So let's just go. I mean, again, I'm not going to really kind of focus in on the 240 tonners either because they are different mechs. But we really can talk about the differences between like the Cyclops and the Catapult here. So let's start with the Cyclops. And again, just to emphasise, not talking about the quality of the miniatures because the ones above are from quite a while ago. Obviously, you'd expect with the amount of money that like Catalyst Games have invested in this and all the kind of designers that they've got on hand, that the quality is obviously, I think we can objectively say that it's a clear and obvious jump up in terms of how the miniature actually looks. But scaling is just it's quite incredible. Like, when I saw that picture at the top and it kind of came into my social media feed, I was like, whoa. That is incredible. I mean, the Cyclops is a 90-ton mech, right? Now, it's kind of a weird one, the Cyclops, because most variants of it are really, really badly armoured, but it looks very chonk. I mean, it's an assault mech, obviously, and you can kind of put that alongside something like an Atlas, which is obviously, it's got 10 tons on the Cyclops, and it won't look that much different. And I think I like that in terms of the assault mechs, because the variance between like an 80-ton mech and a 100-ton mech. So say like you put like an Awesome or a Victor alongside an Atlas. In terms of its like that weight threshold ratio, whatever you want to call it, there's the variance between those two mechs. It's still going to look big and chonk, right? But even for a 90-tonner, I think the Cyclops just looks bulky. Like it's got that big like neck area. I think it's got like one of the kind of quirks that you can use for mechs. Is it like the cowl, which kind of gives it an advantage to kind of getting hit from certain angles for a headshot, I think it is. But you can clearly see that there's like that like neck protection brace up there, and the mech at the top here as well. The old sculpt has that exact same thing as well. Where I kind of, again, I'm not going into critique of the actual miniatures themselves here, but it's got that like helmet thing going on, which I think is absolutely in the law for a Catapult. Obviously, they've dropped that and they've just kind of put it in like a casing, but it's still got like the big eye, hence why it's called the Cyclops. Apology, I may have called that Catapult previously. It's having two mechs with C's, so using them in tangent. But yes, this is the Cyclops. but just like I said, the difference in like girth, I know some of that is like on the positioning as well of like the legs, because the catapult is kind of poised to strike. The new one, it's got like the kind of open leg stance. It's got its arms braced. The one above is looking very like stationary, and you get that across a lot of the old like plastic and metal mechs. To be fair, the one exception there is the Whitworth. The Whitworth looks like ready to pounce there, and I think out of all these miniatures, the Whitworth is standout better. I think they are all from the plastic range, just from looking at their bases. But this looks really, really similar to the Whitworth like Ironwind model that you can get, as does the Cicada. The Cyclops, I've never seen an old 80s Cyclops metal one, but I'd imagine that will be the same. The Catapult, though, the old Catapult miniatures that I have, the metal ones, don't look anything like this. They look far better. I mean, this has got this weird straight leg thing going on, so it looks slightly derpy in terms of its like pose. The Catapult is notable for having those like that like inverse legs, like the one at the bottom here, where it looks like almost like an avian type creature ready to jump and pounce. But yeah, just a weird design on that. But yeah, again, going back to the Cyclops for a second, it just like the height factor is a massive thing. I'm guessing it's got like at least 3/4 of an inch, maybe even an inch on like the old sculpt. So that makes a big difference. There's an argument to suggest it's even a little bit too chonk, the new plastic model. Maybe it should be a bit more streamlined, like the one at the top there. That you'd be a case for that as well, because the Cyclops is very much like a command mech. It's quite famous for having like the battle computer in there. And it's something that a commander would use. It's a mech that it's not a very popular mech, the Cyclops, because it's so like under armored, but it wants to kind of get into the action. It's got like a big AC cannon. It does have LRM weaponry on there as well, but it's a mech that doesn't really know what it wants to do, frankly. But again, I think in terms of scale, though, it looks threatening. I mean, you'd look at that on the battlefield and be like, that's a big mech with a big gun. Guns, let's just talk about that for a second. We can see the differences there in terms of the AC. Like the AC there, which is on the right torso. I believe for a vanilla Cyclops, it's a regular AC 20. You can't really see it. I mean, see if we can zoom in. You can see it there just a little bit, but you see it's just like a small little like gunnery cannon. On the new one though, the AC-20s look like AC-20s. They look very, very like chonk and big, and look very much like an extension of the mech, as opposed to kind of being like interweaved into the design. Apart from that, though, I think the actual like the LRM and the SRM on the like the OG or the old Cyclops here look fine. But again, it's just obviously we're not talking about the quality of the minis themselves. We're talking about the scaling, but they look good. I mean, they look very similar, right? Like if you zoom into there, you can clearly see that that's like an LRM carry, and then it's got the SRM4 there. So that bit of the scaling they got right. I think, frankly, though, beyond scaling, it just looks really like out of sync with itself. Like its arms look too long, its legs look too short. It just looks very stumpy, in terms of its scaling. So you could easily, I think, you could put that on the table against the modern miniatures, and it wouldn't even look as big as like a 55-ton mech. So again, down to the scaling, that's a pretty significant issue there. Moving on to the Catapult, and I have to kind of proclaim some real balance, some bias here. The Catapult is my favourite mech in all of BattleTech, so I absolutely love the Catapult. What I would say, though, is that like if in terms of like the old vision of how the Catapult looked, the new model I think comes way closer to it. I've already mentioned like the legs and how it looks like on a like it's ready to strike. But we'll kind of set all that aside and just look at the weight value there. So the Catapult is a 65-ton mech. Again, this looks significantly smaller, although do keep in mind it's set slightly behind the Cicada and the Whitworth here. These are obviously two 40-ton mechs. The Catapult's got 25 tons on them, plus those big like missile carriers on the side. And it looks, again, I think you probably pass that as a light mech, right? It's significantly smaller than the Cyclops. It looks pretty small anyway. I know we don't really have any scale here, but I have seen these miniatures before, and I do know that they are quite small. But I think as well, a lot of on the new scaling, it's the way that the missile pods, or whatever you want to call them, there are positioned. They just look so much more threatening. They've got those like those guarded doors there that you can and you can do things with that, right? Like you can basically like cut them off and make them closed if you want to, or you can remove them entirely. But I think that gives the catapult much more of a sense of scale. You know, it looks like a heavy mech. It looks like something that, but it can move. You know, it's got just the way that they've kind of put it into that particular pose. Looks like a mech that's ready to jump. It's ready to fight. The mech up here looks like, you know, again, just from its positional sense, looks like it's been, I don't know, like strapped up to a wall or something and just put in storage. But, you know, again, that's to do, obviously, with like how plastic technology has come along and how they can make things look so much more dynamic now. But again, just in terms of scale, you can just see it from back to front, especially like in that, I don't know what you call it, like the waist area where the actuators are and the hip actuators are. You know, the new model, it just looks like a proper like crossbar where the legs are joined onto it. That gives it more, you know, like more girth to it. Same with like the shin area. It's kind of got that almost like protective armor across the shins. And the head, even the head is just so bulky. It's bulky on the one here as well, but it just looks too like elongated on the top image there. I think the new model just gets that like the crescendo, or the way that it kind of arcs backwards. It's just so much more, gives it so much more oomph in terms of its size and scale. So there we are. That's kind of I can't really talk about the other two because they're different models, obviously. But suffice to say that, like, you know, when you're kind of looking at like the Sentinel here. And again, just on scaling, this Sentinel is a 40-ton mech, and it looks, you know, it's stood right next to there, a 90-ton mech. And it looks like that, right? Like, it absolutely looks like a, you know, like there's a over half difference in, like one leg of the Cyclops is like almost as tall as the model, right? And it's just that, like, that difference, that variance, just, I think, gives mechs so much more authority. Now, you could also say that, like, you know, and especially for like lighter mechs, and, you know, unfortunately there are no light mechs on show here, but like, say like the difference between a 20-ton mech and a 30-ton mech is significant when you kind of look at that difference in like, you know, the variable factor. So like I was saying before, going from like an 80-ton to a 100-ton, that mass probably doesn't, well, it definitely doesn't look as obvious as something between a 20 and a 30. And if you were going to show off any of the 20-ton mechs here, like the Locust, you'd see there is a significant difference between like how the Locust looks in terms of its like leg size, and it's like, you know, like the cockpit area and the guns, than there is even between that and a 40-ton mech. So the scale, right, from like 20 up to 100, I think, is now just so well done. I've seen them talk. I've seen the like designers at CGL talk about this and how much how seriously they take scale, and really why they wanted to do that, to make like all the mechs look so like unique, or like, you know, to equate them to their particular like tonnage size, whether it's assault or medium or heavy or light. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see that over 15 years. So let's talk a bit about like why I think Catalyst have really kind of leaned into this, and does it even matter? In fact, does it even matter first, because that's an interesting like question of its own volition. And I remember I posted about this on social media, and a lot of people kind of go on there and say things like, well, weight doesn't really equate to mass in BattleTech. So, you know, like like all the slot levels are the same, right? So whether you're using like a clan mech or an inner sphere mech or a 20-ton mech or a 100-ton mech, it's the same level of slots that you can attach onto a mech for everything. Now, obviously for a light mech, you're going to be able to get less things on there because there's obviously less you can get on there. Whereas for like a 100-tonner, you can probably max out most of the slots across the entire mech. But then I suppose the question is like, yeah, where does that sit? Where is that like mass weight ratio sit? Like, Is it something that's just like they're all pretty much a similar size? It's just that, like, say, the Atlas has got like the LRM 20 on there, which has its weight, and it's AC 20, and they should just be kind of attached and seen as like module attachments. The mechs themselves are just, they will be obviously a bit bulkier or a bit taller, but again, it's an interesting question, and to be honest, I'd never really thought of it about it like that. So it's an interesting thing to discuss and think about. However, speaking subjectively, I don't really care about how that would be viewed at in terms of like mass and weight. What I do know is just instinctively, I want assault mechs to look chonk, and I want light mechs to look sleek. Right? Not all light mechs to look sleek. There are some light mechs that are a bit bulky. If you're thinking about things like a Wolfhound, I think naturally it's more it operates like a medium mech, doesn't it? Does a Wolfhound, so you kind of want it to look a bit more, like solid. Whereas if you're dealing with things like a Flea or a Locust, anything basically below 25 tons, you really kind of want to see it as just like flying across the battlefield on skinny little legs, just shooting across. And I do think it matters. I think as an optic thing, I think if you kind of, if you're playing a game on tabletop and you are leaning into it and really kind of getting into the narrative, it's a great optic. If you've got like, say, 100-ton mech that's just getting absolutely smashed to pieces, maybe it's like turn 9 or something, and its forces have been defeated, and it's just standing alone, and it's just getting picked apart by the opposition. Just seeing watching that as a metric, like when you're kind of stripping off all that armor and all the the critical hits and everything else, just seeing it so big on the table, I think just makes the user experience across the game much more fulfilling. If they mechs all the same, I think it just takes you out of that moment, so to speak. So I think scale is really important as like an emotional element in terms of BattleTech tabletop, especially for 6mm games. I think for 28mm games, it's slightly different, because most of that is just like, whether it's 28mm or 32mm, you're dealing with usually little people. Like, you will have like tanks and, like monster-sized things on there, but they're usually, rarer than just like if you're playing like something like Warhammer 40,000, most of the models are just like 28mm men or aliens. Or be a bit bigger for like Space Marines. Obviously, I think they're like twice the size of your average human being. But my point is that like for 6mm, it's not called epic for no reason, or epic scale, right? Like, you want those big buildings, you want those big mechs, those big terrain features, things like that. And I think adding that scale into BattleTech, or leaning into it, is really important. And having a heavy mech, including the title, looking heavy, and having a light mech looking very sharpish, and like if you're playing on an urban setting and it's like running through all the different buildings, and again, I think just as an experience, an emotional experience with the forces that you're playing, you get a much better time when the scale is correct. That's my kind of feeling on it. Anyway, I know everyone won't feel like that, but that's just my kind of take. Secondly, though, and I think this is where it becomes really commercially important, is obviously over the last, I think it's 15, maybe plus years, they've really kind of pushed Alpha Strike. Alpha Strike is actually very important that with a scale, because you're not playing, it's an important point to know, when you just have Classic, and you can play with just bottle top, so you can play with any model that you want, any proxy model, the scale has no bearing on the game, because everything is determined by the 2D hex map. So if you're stood behind like a 2-level hillside, you're in cover, right? In Alpha Strike, though, the way that the game operates, and a lot of people use like their own homebrews for like cover things or whatever, it really gives the assault mechs. I'll talk about the advantage. It gives the light mechs an advantage being so small, because they're able to get into cover a lot more like easily. In terms of you can't see that mech, 'cause it's just completely eclipsed by that building. Again, I know Alpha Strike's got its own like rules for that, but like I use a bit of a homebrew rule for cover, and I think quite a few people do as well. And I like that. I like it that like a smaller mech should get the advantage of being able to kind of have a little bit more benefit. You get it in the in the movement, right? So like If you move like halfway across the table, you're going to be harder to hit than if you remain stationary. And light mechs can obviously make that move a lot quicker than than heavy or assault mechs usually. So, and again, I think it just gives that little. It's a bit of I'd say it's a narrative thing. 'Cause it's not really. It should be a gameplay mechanic where smaller mechs or, even in like the quirks, a lot of mechs are listed with that narrow or low profile. So you get that with mechs like the urban mech, where, they can take I think the rule is quite a weird one. You get like the glancing blow thing, which I don't use personally, but it's basically saying, look, this mech is either very narrow or very squat, therefore it gets an advantage. So you can kind of bake that in as well to Alpha Strike in terms of the size of the mech. And likewise, I think it should be a disadvantage for assault mechs, because assault mechs are so tall in comparison and should be seen as much bigger. It's a lot harder for them to hide behind that building. Whereas, again, if you're just playing on 2D hex maps, it doesn't matter, because the hex will absolutely tell you what the situation is with terrain. But Alpha Strike, it's different. And that, to me, well, they are the two reasons, really, I think Catalyst have really kind of focused in on scale. And they absolutely have. I mean, I think if this doesn't evidence it, then I don't know what else does. But all the mechs here look like their tonnage in comparison with other mechs. And it's that comparison that's important. You can see very clearly there that the catapult looks over double the size of the Sentinel. And it is, it's 50 tons heavier, so it should look significantly bulkier. And that comparison is all that matters, because if you've got one mech that, if you're running a 75-ton mech that looks like a 35-ton mech in the new plastics, it ruins like the entire scale system, to a point where if they ever did that, or they just stopped caring about scale, I'd probably have to stop collecting the models, because I'm quite fastidious on stuff like that, to a point where a few years ago, I think was even before the new Kickstarter, or the last Kickstarter arrived. I have a real soft spot for quick draws. Love a quick draw. I know it's a derpy mech, but I just really like it. 60-ton mech, and I was really, really keen to get them. I don't have to bother with this now, because the quick draw is coming out in the new Kickstarter, which will be delivered hopefully over the next several months. But I went to Ralpartha and I bought a couple of quick draws, and the scale on them was so bad. Like the old metal miniatures, they really did look like 35, 40-ton mechs. And I just basically, I think I didn't throw them away. I think I just cut them up and kind of used them for terrain, like arms and legs and stuff like that. Because it just looks so stupid. Like if you put that metal quick draw against like the catapult, remember there's only 5 ton of difference. It looked like smaller than the Sentinel over here compared to the catapult there, and it took me so far out of it. And I tried to paint it, I tried to put it alongside it. I remember putting it on like a bit of a raised platform so it would just look a bit naturally bigger. And it just didn't work. It was so noticeable, and you get that a lot with the actual. Again, you've got it certainly with the top picture here with the 2007 run on the plastics, but even with Ralpartha and Ironwind, I think you've got to be really careful about scale. And I have a lot. I think I have maybe like 50, 60 old metal miniatures that are kind of painted within my forces. I have loads of tanks as well, because tanks I'm not that concerned about scale, because they're very low lying anyway, so I don't really care about that. But with the mechs, I really do care. But it's sometimes like I'll get the metal model and I'll be like, yeah, can't use that. It either looks too derpy, like if you look at something like the old metal Jenner, where I'm like, oh, this just does not look threatening. Or you've then got the issue of scale, and it just kind of makes the rest of the forces just look lesser, which is not something I'm keen on, given how much money and time and effort I put into the collection. I want it to look pretty neat and tidy, and that there is like a consistent scale. And you've got to be fair about this as well. There are a lot of old miniatures where the scale's absolutely fine. I mean, I recently painted an Atlas 2, and I think that's a relatively new design. We're getting the new plastic for it as well, but the metal model for that is superb. Like, it looks like an absolute 100-ton tank, so that's a glorious model. So it's not across the board here. Don't be scared of getting the old metal models. They're perfectly good, most of them. It's just maybe do a bit of research into it, or see what that scaling is before you go forward. Anyway, that's it. So, just finally, thank you to whoever photo this is. Don't know you personally. If you ever do see this, though, hope you don't mind me using it. Again, it was just a comparison for scaling over the years. But yeah, on that note, anyway, I think I'll leave it. Not much more to say here. So, I will hopefully catch you again next time.